Hello, I'm Dylan.
And I'm Kiyan.
And this is Triple Play, that podcast where we create movies as an excuse to depict sex and violence. Because this time we watched the Once Upon a Time trilogy.
Written by, brace yourself here.
I'm bracing. I mean, I already know how many names are to come, so...
And they're all Italian, and they will all be pronounced incorrectly.
I'm ready to hear all your pronunciations. This is what I'm actually bracing for.
Sergio Donati,
Okay.
Bernardo Bertolucci, Sergio Leone, Dario Argento, Luciano Vincenzoni, Roberto De Leonardis, Carlo Trito, Leonardo Benvenuti, Piero De Bernardi, Enrico Mediolo, Franco Arcali, and Franco Ferrini.
Directed by Sergio Leone.
And released in 1968, 1971, and 1984.
I had a very easy job this week.
Yeah, because, leave it to Sergio Leone to not let anyone impede on his directorial dictatorship. Just kidding, he actually wanted other directors to take over for him, but fate wouldn't have that.
Yeah, no, basically every source I was reading about behind the scenes info for Once Upon a Time in America was like, this was the movie that killed Sergio Leone. And I can see why. Not like why I can see why the stress of making it killed him.
Well, to me it killed all, attachment to his movie making style, because while I loved Once Upon a Time in the West and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, those were the peak. Say
Duck You Sucker.
Those were the peak. No.
Looking back on it, because I guess we should. I'm going to mention this because I'm probably going to make reference to it later. Looking back on the fact that we watched these like 2 weeks ago now, we had some scheduling kerfuffles to deal with. Anyway, the fact that we watched it 2 weeks ago, in those 2 weeks, I've really looked back like, damn, Duck You Sucker was actually like a pretty good movie. I know while we were watching it, we were like, damn, this is kind of really boring. But you know what? Looking back on it, I really admire it. I understand why it gained a weird cult following. Kind of want to watch it again, which is something. It's just more than I can say for the other two movies we watched.
I would gladly watch Once Upon a Time in the West again.
Yeah, okay, I might watch it. I would watch it again. I'm just saying, at this moment, I want to rewatch Duck You Sucker.
I don't know about that. I guess we'll get into it when we talk about how they all worked as a trilogy. But I just think, it was all downhill after Once Upon a Time in America.
Many people consider Once Upon a Time... You mean Once Upon a Time in the West, right?
Yeah.
Many people consider Once Upon a Time in America to be one of the greatest movies ever made. And, again, I can see what they're seeing, but I can't say that it's personally for me. It's just not to my taste.
I can't see what they're seeing because I don't consider it one of the greatest anythings ever.
I mean, I don't either, but I can see how people might, I guess. But it's not for me. It's not for me. Anyway, so let's start with Once Upon a Time in the West, which was Sergio Leone was like, I've done the Dollars trilogy. Now I'm going to do a Western that's...
With Clint Eastwood again, and with Eli Wallach again, and they're going to be back, and it's going to be the same.
Well, he wanted Eli Wallach back for Duck You Sucker, actually.
Yeah.
But he's like, I'm going to do a Western. It's going to be an Italian Western, but it's also going to reference American Westerns, but also American non-Westerns. It's going to be one big reference-filled movie. Everything's going to be references. References all the way down.
Yeah, according to, we're going to keep making references to this article, so I'll just mention it. There's a very, very long article about the making of Once Upon a Time in the West.
Right.
And it's like the first, if you Google making of Once Upon a Time in the West, it's like the first hit. So check that out. It'll be in the notes.
I'm pretty sure it consists of almost every citation on Wikipedia for this movie too. So.
But according to that article, this was Leone's, attempt to use Western conventions and references to tell his story, or like an Italian story of the birth of a nation, the birth of America.
Right.
Obviously, and I think that's the exact kind of language they used. Obviously, referencing that movie, Birth of a Nation, the silent one, which I've never seen, but is apparently was like really racist and stuff.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Well, that's what was interesting to me, is because when I read that, I was like, okay, this is that movie, because that's an American movie about the birth of America, and this is an Italian movie that's kind of about that same, like, about how what we know today as America was formed, and it's not necessarily as gung-ho patriotic as I've heard Birth of a Nation is.
Well, I was going to say, actually, I just realized I want to go back in time, actually, slightly a bit further, because before actually agreeing to make this movie, Leone had already started on his magnum opus, shall I say, Once Upon a Time in America, because he read this book called The Hoods. And I'm just gonna... it's by a pseudonym Harry Gray, but I think we actually know who Harry Gray is Herschel Goldberg. And it's semi/totally autobiographical. I say semi because he used a pseudonym to write it, so like, if he's going to use a pseudonym to write it, is he necessarily going to put all the gory details in the book? Maybe not. If he was, because apparently he was like actually scared about the people he was in the mob with coming to find him, which is why he used a pseudonym. But that also leads me to believe that maybe not everything in the book is fully and totally accurate.
Well, was he billing it as an autobiography, or was it supposed to be fiction?
I don't actually know.
Yeah, me neither. Which is why I ask.
I think he was billing it as an autobiography. So.
Huh.
But anyway. But he used a pseudonym to write it. And then I guess that gets into an interesting question of, if he used a pseudonym to write an autobiography, is it like actually a biography? Because it's clear, or is it an autobiography? Because it's clearly not a biography of the pseudonymous person that you used to write the book.
Yeah. Or you could, like, series of unfortunate events, this thing, the unauthorized autobiography, which is what, like, there's a making of book of that book series, and it's called the unauthorized autobiography. Or you could go, like, early 18th century and, like, just write completely fictional, made-up stories and be like, yep, this is real, this actually happened. Like,
or you could be like Leonard Nimoy and title your memoir, I Am Spock. It's actually pretty clever because he wrote a book called I Am Not Spock, which was his first, like, memoir, which is, like, the first half of his life, and basically talking about how he was more than, like, the character of Spock, and then his second memoir was titled I Am Spock.
Just kidding, I was wrong. I am Spock.
Anyway, so he wanted to make this movie, but because the Dollars trilogy was so successful, pretty much every studio was like, no, we want you to make a Western. And he was like, but I don't want to make a Western. I want to make this gangster movie. And they're like, you don't make gangster movies, Sergio. You make Westerns.
He was like, fine. Well, I think Paramount came to him and he was like, fine.
Yeah, because they offered him the chance to work with Henry Fonda, who is an American actor who acted in a lot of American Westerns and who apparently Sergio Leone wanted to really work with for a long time and just hadn't had the opportunity to do so.
Right.
And so seeing this opportunity, he decided to pounce upon it.
Right.
And then that's how we get the whole, it's going to be references all the way down. And then, like you said, with telling the birth of a nation through the lens of the Western.
Yeah. Another note I have here is that, and I literally just wrote this down because it referenced Borges, but apparently Leone was aiming for to depict the relationship between popular fiction, which is where the Once Upon a Time comes from, because those are popular stories. Like, Once Upon a Time, there was, now I'm blanking on fairy tales, but, and their historical basis, which is like the West.
Right.
Which like really actually puts things in perspective to me, because there is that, like, I mean, all of the Sergio Leone Westerns are like realistic movies, but there's some hint of like fantasy in these movies in a way. Like, remember the scene in For a Few Dollars More where they're shooting the hat? Like, I guess that's possible, but like, there's some hint of like magical realism or stuff in here.
I mean, the considerable amount of dynamite that John has in Duck You Sucker, like.
Yeah, and this site calls it nearer Borges than Hollywood, which Jorge Luis Borges is who they're referencing, who's an Argentinian writer who writes some really like fascinating, like in your mind stories that like really kind of haunt you. But I read that this was sort of, when they sat down to write this, it was a coalition between Leone, Bertolucci, and Argento.
Yeah.
And as far as I can remember, Bertolucci and Argento were sort of, I guess you could say, junior to Leone. They kind of looked up to him, and they weren't as far in their careers as he was.
Well, he had considerable notoriety after the Dollars trilogy.
Right.
So they considered this an opportunity to work with a legend. And that's actually what convinced Henry Fonda to do the movie as Frank, because Henry Fonda had been typecast at that point as the good guy, and he didn't want to play like the bad guy. And then he called Eli Wallach, and he's like, look, you're going to have the time of your life. You get to work with this great guy. Like, just do it. And so Fonda was like, all right.
And Paramount, I think, definitely used that in their advertising of like the first time Henry Fonda plays a villain.
Which is, it's interesting because it undermines what I read Sergio Leone was kind of going for with the like first time we see Henry Fonda's face. It's right before he kills the kid.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be like this moment like, oh, is it like, because when the gang comes out of the forest at the beginning of the movie, I guess like really like half an hour into the movie because of the pace of this damn thing.
Yeah.
When the family dies, you kind of left wondering like, are they there to save? Were they there to save them and were they too late? Or were they the ones who killed them? And then the kid, they kill the kid, and it's Henry Fonda kills the kid, and it's like, oh, there's a big moment. Oh, Fonda's the villain.
Right. And that kind of speaks to like how this is a movie for like obviously made by this like really cinephile guy, but it's also like weirdly for people who watch a lot of movies and know like, all right, Henry Fonda is going to be the good guy, which I didn't know until I looked it up.
Neither did I.
Which is why that scene, like if you know that, if you go in knowing that, then that has that impact for you. But if you don't, like I did, like I didn't, like, you know what I mean, then it doesn't have that impact.
Well, it plays into the fact that like Henry Fonda also wanted to like, facial hair, and he wanted to use blue contacts for his eyes brown, to like change, to kind of differentiate himself from the old roles.
Yeah.
And this one, Sergio's like, no, you have to like look like the other one, blue eyes, like no facial hair, like you have to look like the other roles you play, but just this time you're the villain, basically.
Right. As for the other characters, we have Charles Bronson playing harmonica. This was the role that was originally going to be given to Clint Eastwood, but he backed out.
Was it Charles Bronson who was also considered for the No Name Man in one of those movies, and he had to turn it down?
I think so, yeah.
We're kind of like backwards parallels there.
Yeah. But according to a couple sites, actually, harmonica is actually supposed to be one of the reasons why they chose Bronson, and this kind of doesn't make sense to me, is because harmonica is actually supposed to be Native American. Which
that I didn't get that at all.
No, I didn't get that at all because Bronson isn't Native American.
No, but not only that, they didn't do anything with his character that would seem to imply he was Native American.
No, they didn't.
They
I'm just regurgitating what the internet told me. But that's why it was so weird to me, is because like a couple of these sites, and again, one of these is the long article. We're billing this as like they chose Bronson because the character is supposed to be Native American, and that didn't add up to me because Bronson himself is not Native American.
Right.
But Sergio has also, I think, gone on record as saying he also chose Bronson because the wrinkles on his face make it look stone-like, and he wanted someone like with a stone-like face.
Also, I just wanted to look it up to double check. It's actually what's his name, Coburn from Dakusaku, who was considered for the No Name Man, not Bronson.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So, just wanted to.
Well, that same thing happened with the next movie which we'll get into. So
they all really wanted Clint Eastwood. Claudia Cardinale is an Italian actress, as far as I know.
Yeah, I did not realize that she was dubbed when I was watching the movie.
Yeah, it's done very well.
Yeah.
I think there was only, when I was watching it, there was only really one or two scenes that it seemed like maybe it was dubbed, but I couldn't tell. So it's done very well.
Yeah, definitely. She was actually, I read, a pretty established, actress in Italy and France.
I had actually heard her name before this, surprisingly.
Oh, wow.
So.
Huh. Yeah, she plays Jill. And then we have Jason Robards playing Cheyenne.
Which was supposed to be like another almost Tuco-esque character, I think.
Right.
Much like Dakyusaka also has their Tuco-esque character.
Yeah, but with this one, I don't think they tried to contact Eli Wallach for
No,
Cheyenne.
I don't believe so, yeah.
Apparently, Robards, I read, was difficult to work with. He went to his first interview drunk.
This sounds like when they tried to get Chuck Wepner to be in...
Oh, yeah, in Rocky 3.
in Rocky 3, and he just showed up to the audition just like drunk or hungover or something.
Yeah, flashbacks to Chuck, that weird movie that couldn't decide whether it was sympathetic to Chuck or not.
That weird movie with Leaf's package.
Wait, what? I don't remember this.
Didn't we make a reference to this in that? Or am I conflating this with something else?
Well, I don't remember it either way.
No, because, wasn't there that scene where he's wearing those, like, tidy whities? And we're like, you can basically see Leaf's whole package. I'm pretty sure that was this movie. I'm like 90% sure.
Well, again, either way, I don't remember that. But the cast was assembled. The rest of the actors were mostly Italians, I believe.
Mostly nobodies.
Yeah. Pretty much. So as for filming, there were actually 4 locations used for this movie. Or, no, sorry, I think it was 3 for this one. The studios in Rome, which was the interiors, and then Spain, and then the U.S.
Yeah, they actually used locations in the U.S. for all 3 of these, I believe.
Yeah, for this one they went to Monument Valley, which you can tell that they did for the movie because they're in Monument Valley. There's no way you can really fake that, especially not in '68.
Hey, don't underestimate 1968. Hey, that rhymed. 1968, Doctor Who was putting Cybermen on our screens. Don't underestimate, and that was just a TV show. They landed in Antarctica.
1963, Doctor Who was putting the Vord on our screens. So,
and that was a TV show.
Yeah, I didn't really have anything else for the filming of it.
Well, Ennio Morricone did his usual score for this movie, which is, of the 3, like the only one he really did. The stuff he did for the Dollars trilogy, again, he didn't reuse the music, but like he did the same kind of thinking again. And again, Sergio Leone was very involved in the music writing process and used the music to pace the film. Although I think I read that for this movie, he was aware that there were criticisms of like Good, Bad, the Ugly being too long. So this one, I think he did at least try to keep it a little bit shorter, which I think it is actually. Yeah,
I mean, I think in the in the post production, not segment, but in post production, there was an intention with this movie to all right, we have 6 hours of footage, we need to cut this down a lot. But speaking of the music, I read that was actually kind of there was a troubled development of the soundtrack of this movie. Morricone decided to take it in slightly a different direction. I didn't realize this until I read it, but unlike the Dollars trilogy, there's no whip cracks or gun sounds or anything in the soundtrack. It's all instrumental. But weirdly enough, I read this story where there was the opening scene, which is 14 minutes long and doesn't have there's only one. I
did not realize it was that long.
Yeah, there's one line of dialogue. And the rest of it is just the sounds of the train stop.
Oh yeah, I read that as well.
But the thing that inspired this is Morricone was having trouble nailing down the music for the scene, and Leone was not approving what he was giving him and stuff. And then Morricone went to this concert where this guy performed what he called the Symphony of the Metal Ladder, where it was just sounds made by a metal ladder. And then he was like, this is it. This is what we're doing sound-wise for this first scene. And that's why we get all the diegetic, in-universe sounds and no music and no dialogue. And apparently someone tried to oil the squeaky windmill right before they filmed. And Leone was like, no!
I think I also read that this was the first of Morricone's scores to, be partially diegetic as well, because harmonica plays his musical theme on the harmonica during the movie.
Wasn't there
I mean, there was the pocket watch chimes in for a few dollars more.
Yeah.
Which there is like a segment of this score that sounds suspiciously like those chimes.
It is. It's the same. I mean, he reused the chimes in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly too.
Those ones were slightly different, though. I remember those ones being similar but different. This one, I think, is like directly lifted for a few dollars more.
Well, look, I mean, I've said it before, but I'm pretty sure Morricone has like over 100 movie scores under his belt.
Yeah.
So
that's like, I was listening to, The Mandalorian is out now.
Yeah.
And I was listening to a piece of the score the other day, and it sounds... Ludwig Göransson, I think, is his last name. Göransson, I don't know how to pronounce it. There's an accent on the A that I don't know how to say. He wrote the score for that and for Creed, and I was listening to part of The Mandalorian going, damn, this is just straight out of Creed. He's just reusing parts of the Creed score. So, composers reuse stuff all the time. Hans Zimmer did it. If you listen to the track The Cistern from the movie Inferno, the Tom Hanks one, it's literally just the docking sequence from Interstellar.
Writers reuse the same thing all the time as well. Like, just read, if you're interested in an author, just read all their books like back to back, and you'll realize how much they reuse from book to book. Or watch all the Sergio Leone movies back to back, and you'll realize how much is reused.
Until he gets to Once Upon a Time in America.
Yeah. Other interesting tidbits from the making of this movie. Apparently, Henry Fonda and Leone didn't work as well together as they could. Fonda came to have a respect for Leone, but Leone, as we know from the last time we watched a trilogy of his, is a perfectionist and liked to work like 15-hour days.
Mm-hmm. That was something that I read again for Once Upon a Time in America because we wouldn't get there.
Yeah, and he requested Fonda's scenes be done like 12 times. And there was this quote from him like, I wish I could have, this isn't verbatim obviously, but he's like, I wish I could have cut it back, but we really had to do Fonda's scenes 12 times.
It's like when Stanley Kubrick asks people to do another scene 37 times to get it right. I think that was in, was that Clockwork Orange? I don't know. Maybe The Shining.
Oh, so some more just, I guess, interesting tidbits from the making of this. Apparently, the first scene done was the sex scene between Jill and Frank.
Wow.
And Paramount billed this as like they call it the first true love scene of Fonda's career.
It is. It thematically foreshadows Once Upon a Time in America, shall we say.
Yeah. And what was even weirder about this is that, how in most like movie, sex scenes or just movie scene, not even sex scenes, movie scenes where actors are supposed to be naked, they're not actually naked. They're like most of what you can, like, they get away with as not naked as they can be. So, like, most of those sex scenes or, like, bathing scenes or whatever, they have pants on or whatever. No, they're not actually naked. But apparently, Leone himself requested that, what's her face?
Claudia Cardinale.
Yeah, be actually naked for this. At first, she was like, no. But then he was like, yes.
But why? You don't even see anything.
Exactly. That's what I said as well.
I think Leone was just using his position as a director to see some things, shall we say.
And yeah, she was like, yeah, it was awkward, but I did it.
Pretty much every actress who has done a sex scene has been like, yeah, it's the most awkward thing to film ever. So.
Yeah.
Although, Elizabeth McGowan in Once Upon a Time in America had some things to say about that movie. She plays Deborah.
I did not find any of that.
Oh, I found an interview where someone basically. Well, we'll get there. Yeah. We'll get there.
I mean, that's all I had about the making of. I have some post-release info as well. I mean, it came out to at least
applause.
Especially in Europe. Apparently, there was a theater in France that played this movie for 4 years straight.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was very popular in France and Italy. So Mickey Knox, who I remember being the translator for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, he's back as the translator for this, and apparently Leone promised him a credit at the beginning of the movie as like English language dialogue by Mickey Knox or something like that. Didn't fulfill on that promise, and he only has a credit in the end credits of like translator.
Yeah, I'm noticing more and more, the more Sergio Leone movies we watch, the more of kind of a dick he seems.
Yeah, I mean, people actually said it was at the end of the long article that we keep referring to, of like, it was just quote after quote of people telling Leone, like, you're a great filmmaker, but a bad person. Like, just straight up telling him that.
Great.
And also people telling him, like, you're a better filmmaker when you focus on the more filmic ideas. So, like, you're better at the technical aspects of filmmaking and not the, like, high-minded stuff you tried to go for in Duck You Sucker and Once Upon a Time in America. So really railing into him there, which I don't know if I agree with that, but people have said it.
Wow. That's a bit rough.
Yeah.
Kind of typecasting him as a director by doing that, weirdly enough.
But as with most of Sergio Leone's movies, this got abridged when it came to America. And I knew they had cut it in the American cut, but I read that they actually cut Cheyenne's death out of the movie completely.
Wow, that's kind of a pivotal moment in the movie.
Yeah.
That moment changes the entire like emotion of the scenes before it when he was talking with what's her name, Sweetwater, in the house with Jill.
Yeah.
Because like his whole thing is like he's talking to her like he's gonna live, but like he's not the right man for her, and he's gonna go off and like he's gonna be okay, like telling her like don't worry about me, I'm gonna be fine. And then he immediately goes and just dies, and it's revealed that he was lying to her to just like keep her, from the truth basically. So you cut that scene, it like entirely changes that whole thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
They did that obviously because they showed this to some test audiences first, and the responses were like too slow, too boring, and too long.
The long article, like, I think it's the long article. At the beginning, the guy says something like, or he quotes a movie reviewer who's like, we can have good movies that are fast, but why does that mean we can't have good movies that are slow? Like,
yeah, that was Graham Greene, actually. Weirdly enough, Graham Greene is a huge fan of these movies, or was. I think he's dead now. Would be surprised if he's not dead
Makes
now.
a good point, though. Like, why is the speed at which the film feels like it's moving necessarily used as, like, a negative descriptor of the movie? Like,
right. And that's something that I think has really influenced a lot of movies, because nowadays you have a lot of fast-paced movies that are just super fast, and
it's nice to have a film that moves slow once in a while. Blade Runner 2049 was a slow movie, and I enjoyed that because it moved slow, but it felt very dense. So you felt, when you at the end of it, you felt like you had gotten a very nice, complete story. Yeah,
and that's actually something Leone mentioned. I forget if it was for this one or if it was for Duck You Sucker, but he said one thing I don't want to do that Hollywood does is have that fast pace of dialogue.
He doesn't want to Chris Boucher it, is what he's saying.
No, and exactly. And he actually, he said he didn't want to have the thing that Hollywood was doing at the time where they basically directed the actors to have either no break between the lines or actually step on the last syllable of the other actor's line, which is apparently a thing that was, directors were actually saying at the time. And he was like, I'm not having any of that in my movie. And again, I forget if it was for this one or if it was for Duck You Sucker. But actually, I want to touch on the Graham Greene thing because I haven't read too much from Graham Greene. The only novel I've read some of his short stories, but the only novel I've read from him is what
Power and the Glory.
Yeah, The Power and the Glory. And
one of my favorite novels of all time.
Yeah, same here. And now that I remember that book, I'm like, wow, that's a Western.
Kind of realizing the same thing.
And the first scene in that book is like the first scene in this movie. It's like a dialogueless thing of this guy out in the desert just doing stuff.
Well, even the whole thing about the whole book is that the priest goes unnamed, and that's that is almost directly lifted from the Dollars trilogy. We never get Clint Eastwood's character's name in any of the movies, and they don't even give him a name or a nickname in the movie like Harmonica gets in this movie. Because we don't know Harmonica's... Well, we actually do learn Harmonica's real name in the movie, but everyone just calls him Harmonica.
Yeah, it was... What was it, David or something? It was really disappointing.
Yeah, it was something really lame. And they don't even make a big point of it. Someone just goes, oh yeah, that David guy, or something like that.
And he's just like, shh, I'm Harmonica. No. But now that I think about it, was The Power and the Glory, wasn't that written in like the 40s or something? So it was before this. I don't remember honestly when it was written.
I do want to find out on this Power. 1940.
Yeah, so it's before all of these, but it has some of the same thing. Maybe that's why Graham Greene. Maybe that's why Graham Greene liked these movies so much. He's like, hey, my book's on screen without actually being on screen.
Maybe. You could have always just sold the rights to the movie. Or to the book, I mean, like the rights to make a movie for the book.
Yeah. But that's all I had for this one.
Same. And we get Duck You Sucker with James Coburn.
Yeah, I read that Donati actually proposed the idea for this movie during the making of Once Upon a Time in the West.
I read that as well while we were watching the movie, in fact.
And Leone was like, yeah, it sounds great, but I'm not going to direct it.
Yeah, he's like, I'll find someone else to direct it, but I'll like help out. I think he'll take a producer role or something.
Yeah, I think at the time his mindset was that he wanted to direct Once Upon a Time in America instead. Mm-hmm. But obviously then...
Again, it's coming back to his magnum opus.
Yeah, but again, during the making of that, he actually tried to get a co-director as well.
That movie was just... That movie. Yeah, so this is the one where they got James Coburn, who was one of the people considered for the role of the unnamed, the unnamed man in the Dollars trilogy.
Oh, yeah. Well, in this he has a name. It's John.
Yeah, it's John and Juan.
Yeah.
And the character of Juan, I read, was explicitly written for Eli Wallach.
Right. They both turned down the roles, though.
Well, so I read this on Wikipedia, but I didn't see it anywhere else, and I'm not sure if it's cited. But there was apparently a thing where like Sergio Leone really, really convinced Eli to do the movie, and Eli Wallach eventually dropped another project in order to do this movie. And then the studio was like, no, we don't want Wallach. We're getting, what's his name?
Rod
Steiger.
Was he Juan or John?
Juan.
Okay.
And the studio said, no, we're getting Rod Steiger. And so Sergio was like, sorry, Eli, like we have to go with Rod. And then Eli apparently ended up suing for this.
Did he win?
I don't know, because again, I only read it on Wikipedia, and I don't know if there's like a citation or not.
Huh.
So.
Yeah, so I mean, did you have anything else for the casting? Because I didn't.
No, not for the casting.
Yeah, for actual, for the shooting, we were questioning while watching this, like, did they actually do it in Ireland? And yeah, they actually went to Dublin for the Ireland scenes.
Wow.
So
seems
this
a
is
bit of overkill for the amount of Ireland scenes that were actually in the movie.
Yeah, so they filmed at Howth Castle, which fans of James Joyce will know about in more detail than maybe you want to know about it. But
is this a reference to Ulysses? Or I'm not a James Joyce fan, so I don't know.
There's the first page of Finnegan's Wake is extremely difficult to read. It took me like an hour and a half to read it, and is apparently, I read online, it's many things, but it's also a coded message to help you draw a map of an accurate map of Dublin that looks like a penis, and it starts at Howth Castle.
Wow. That reminds me of a poem I wrote once that was just a detailed recipe on how to bake chocolate chip cookies disguised as a love poem.
Yeah. Well, if you still have that, maybe that'll have to be in the show notes.
I do still have it.
But yeah, so they went to Dublin. So that's the scenes you see that are in, the fields and in the pubs and stuff are actually in Dublin. And then they, of course, as every Italian movie seems to do, went to Spain. Or every Italian Western, I should say. Mm-hmm. Or every Leone movie. I've never actually watched any other spaghetti Westerns. Watched other Westerns, but...
Yeah, James Coburn was in The Magnificent Seven. So we've even seen James Coburn himself in another Western.
Who did he play in The Magnificent Seven? I completely forgot.
I remember looking up this character's name and not remembering who it was.
The only distinct characters from Magnificent Seven were the main character, the main guy, who assembles the team, and the kid, and the guy who was like on the run because
Brit. He plays Brit.
yeah, don't know who
Just
Brit
while
is.
we're on that topic, weirdly enough, James Coburn also voices Waternoose in Monsters Inc. Just saying.
Wow, wow.
What a career trajectory. For the music, I know Ennio Morricone tried to do something quite different. I know it was called by the New York Times one of his most glorious and unforgettable scores. And
No.
yeah, I agree with the second half that it's unforgettable. I can kind of admire what he's trying to do. I just don't think it works.
No, it doesn't. None of the music fits, in my opinion,
Yeah.
at all.
It's
I don't even know how to describe
it's
it.
very proto-techno.
I mean, techno music existed at this, well, in like a very, electronic music existed, I should say.
Yeah, but not like when you think of electronic music, you think of like heavy bass,
Techno,
high tempo. Whereas it's like Morricone techno. It's slow, but techno.
Well, what was weird is that like the really heavy like guitars actually really worked for Once Upon a Time in the West, which is like you don't really associate electric guitar with the West, but it worked. You got those now.
Decorative Vegetable cover of Ennio Morricone's greatest hits when. But also, I was thinking about this. I don't know if it's so much that the score itself doesn't work, or that it's that
The movie doesn't work at all.
no, that
Just kidding.
the movie doesn't edit itself around the score. The score feels like it was just tacked on at the end, which I think is a very like modern Hollywood thing. A lot of movies recently, in my opinion, just have movie scores that are just tacked on at the end that don't
Oh yeah.
like benefit the movie. And it feels like Morricone wrote the score with something very specific in mind, and when the movie was edited or directed even, it wasn't as linked to the music as things like Once Upon a Time in the West and the other ones were.
Yeah, and that I think brings us back to some of the writing troubles that occurred during this movie, because I forget who it was. I think it was either Donati or Vincenzoni had a very different idea for what this movie would be. They kind of imagined it more as like a thriller with spy elements and stuff like that. It's not what it ended up being.
Yeah, I think Leone wanted to be kind of allegorical for the revolution in Paris, I think.
Yeah.
It happened roughly sometime that Leone knew about it.
Sometime during his life.
I genuinely don't know which revolution, the Paris Revolution that everyone references, referred to.
I know it had something to do with students like boycotting like stuff.
I'm woefully uneducated on this point. And of course, I mean, the weird thing is that if you're writing a techno thriller or a thriller in general, like why would you get Sergio Leone to direct it though? Like he's known for westerns, but not only that, he's known for movies that are slow and they take their time and they're very careful, and that's like the opposite of what a thriller is.
Well, he didn't even, like we mentioned before, he didn't even want to direct. He actually wanted to have someone else. I'm forgetting who it is. I didn't write him down, but there was another director he had in mind.
I think he had quite a few directors in mind, because
Yeah.
I think he was like literally like, please, anybody but me.
But then but Rod Steiger, or however you pronounce his name, was like, I'm not going to act if you don't direct. Like, I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah. But then I read that him and Sergio Leone actually had like a lot of trouble working together, and like apparently Rod Steiger was a really difficult person to work with.
I read that the original vision for Juan's character was completely different than how he portrayed it, and that what we got on screen was totally different than what was intended.
Well, what we got on screen works just fine, so
Yeah,
I'm not complaining.
I agree.
Juan and John, develop a friendship over the movie. I remember reading an analysis of Once Upon a Time in the West that was like, this is the first Sergio Leone movie where the characters actually change over the course of the movie, and every movie of his moving forward from that point like has that element to it. And I was like, and then I had to think about it, and I was like, yeah, the characters in the Dollars trilogy don't actually go through any change in the movie. They do the plot and they're done.
Yeah.
Whereas like in Once Upon a Time in the West, Cheyenne starts off as he's the big bad that everybody thinks has done this job. By the end of the movie, he's like, he actually helps, what's her name, get
Jill
get keep the keep the property of the land by basically coming up with a scheme to turn himself in to get the money to buy the land for her, and then he's just going to escape. Like, he goes over that character arc during the movie. Right.
I also read, I think this was in the Long article, but I'm not entirely sure.
Like how it's just the Long article now.
Yeah. Someone was talking about like the role that women play in Sergio Leone's movies, and they were saying that he as a director and writer was totally unconcerned with women, and in fact was on the other hand totally concerned with male friendships and male relationships between two males. And that really comes across heavily in this trilogy, but really heavily starting here, and then definitely in Once Upon a Time in America as well.
Right.
And here, I mean, when we were watching this, I almost obviously this is Italian and way after like the production code era of movies, but like those flashbacks between John and his friend, like I almost read that as like a coded, homosexual relationship.
Well, she kisses both of them like in succession.
Yeah, which is why I kind of read that as like vicariously they're kissing each other.
Possibly. Maybe they just have a throuple relationship.
Yeah.
It's a continued threesome, a ménage à trois. Ménage à trois directly, the French direct translation is three people living together. But it has another colloquial term, which is not what I'm referencing.
Alrighty then.
Yeah, so I don't have much more, except that Duck You Sucker has gained like a cult following over the last couple of decades since it came out. I'm going to count myself among them. I think it's actually a pretty good movie. Although, if I watch it again, I might come out of it and be like, you know what, that sucked.
Nah, I don't agree. This was the beginning of the end for me. In terms of Leone's filmmaking abilities, this is where it starts to go downhill.
I don't think his abilities took a downturn. I think he just tried something new and it didn't work.
Yeah.
For me, anyway, I guess, again, specify.
Well, Morricone also phoned it in for this. Not phoned it in, but just went a direction, again, I think that didn't work.
Well, he didn't want to do this movie, so maybe he did phone it in. But then he was like, all right, I'm Once Upon a Time in America or bust. If I don't make this damn movie, I'm not making any other movie. And then he was offered The Godfather, which we're watching. Spoiler alert, is going to be the first episode of season 3 of Triple Play.
Right. And yeah, Paramount actually came to him and asked him to make The Godfather. But he was like, hey, I read this book called Hoods, and I'm going to do that instead.
Which is interesting because it's also a gangster movie based in New York, based on a book. So those both, like, there's actually, like, interestingly some similarities there.
Yeah. And, we were talking about this while we were watching it, but, like, this is the one, like, movie that I can think of that focuses on, like, a Jewish mob and not an Italian mob. Mm-hmm. Which is, like, actually really funny to me because of, like, the amount of Italians they have at their disposal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also an interesting what if to consider, like, if he had directed The Godfather, there was, like, the entire history of cinema might have changed because Francis Ford Coppola gets famous partially because of Apocalypse Now, but also he does The Godfather, and then his daughter, Sofia Coppola, is now also a director, and it's like you have to wonder if all of these things would have happened if Leone had done The Godfather instead.
Yeah.
Because Francis Ford Coppola, did he do Apocalypse Now after Godfather? Maybe? I don't remember.
No idea.
He's like a pretty influential director because of Apocalypse Now and The Godfather and probably numerous other movies that I'm forgetting right now, which we'll talk about on the next episode.
Yeah.
Whenever that's going to be.
As for the casting of this, Claudia Cardinale, or Cardinale, or however you say it, actually wanted to play Carol in this. Mm-hmm. But Leone said no, I believe.
Yeah, I don't remember the justification he gave for why.
No, I don't either.
Yeah, I found, so earlier I think I made reference to this, but I found an article that's an interview of Elizabeth is it Gowan or Govern?
I don't know.
Elizabeth McGovern talking about her time making this movie, and she plays Deborah,
Right.
the Noodles' love interest.
Yeah.
And she actually reveals quite a lot of interesting, I think, information about making the movie, but also about Robert De Niro, who was cast in this movie as Noodles.
Right.
And she talks about how him and, again, this is another story of like Sergio Leone being difficult to work with, but apparently him and like Robert De Niro both are perfectionists, so we already knew Sergio Leone was a perfectionist, but apparently Robert De Niro was also a perfectionist, and because of that, they like apparently had some disagreements multiple times about like what to do with the scene, because Robert was fine with doing the scene like 20 more times, but he always wanted to do it his specific way, whereas Sergio wanted to do it like his specific way, and she was like, She talks a lot about how she also played old Deborah.
Which is really weird when you watch it because everyone else is like really old and Deborah hasn't aged a single day.
Yeah, she talks about that. She's like, I feel like it was a mistake to have me play old Deborah as well because she says she looks upon, basically I'm paraphrasing here, she looks upon that performance as like her being pretty bad as an actress because she didn't know what to do because she didn't have the life experience any of these other actors had. This was one of like her first big movies.
Huh.
And she's like, she was saying she thinks it's a mistake to have her play the old Deborah because she said, you know, when she was doing the scene, she was like, I don't even know if what I'm doing makes any sense. Like for my character, for where I am in life, like I don't even know. And the interviewer is like, oh, I disagree. I think it's great. And she's like, well, thanks, but like,
but no.
well, thanks, but no.
Yeah, I think I agree with her take. I think it was probably a mistake for her to play older Deborah. If only probably for the reasons she's mentioning, but also just for like, it's so weird that Deborah has not aged when everyone else has.
Young Deborah is actually played by a different person. When we were watching it, we were like, damn, either those are the same people or they got two people who look really, really similar. But it's actually Jennifer Connelly, of all people, playing young Deborah, who she's like a pretty big actress now. She was in Alita Battle Angel this year, randomly. Yeah, she gained most of her notoriety for being in A Beautiful Mind.
I've actually seen that.
So she plays
Weirdly
young Deborah
enough.
in, I think, her first film credit, actually.
Huh. Interesting.
James Woods also apparently, he was also apparently a very like laid back, I think, actor who like Robert De Niro. Actually, I remember this. Robert De Niro is also a character actor.
Oh, wow.
And apparently James Woods was like not super down with this. He just thought Robert De Niro was coming off as a prick by doing this. And he's like, look, acting is acting. Like embodying the character outside of the role is like not going to improve your performance because you're still performing the same character. So him and like De Niro apparently had some friction on that.
Some people say it works. What was that Abraham Lincoln movie that came out like 6 to 7 years ago? Do you remember that?
The one just called Lincoln?
Yeah, who cared? The guy who played Lincoln, I don't remember who it was. It's some famous guy. Character acted Lincoln, which must have been really annoying for the people around him.
Well, Jared Leto is a character actor, and he played the Joker, and he character acted the Joker, and that apparently was really annoying for all the people around him.
Just actually murder people.
He mailed them dead rats, apparently. Just actually, didn't we? God, deja vu. We've had this exact same exchange before.
Anyway, Leone, despite my theory that the reason he didn't want to direct Docu-Sucker is because he wanted to direct this, so maybe that theory doesn't hold up, he actually wanted to recruit John Milius to direct this, who is, I think, a pretty well-known director, though I don't know what he's done. I don't know what his career has been. But I watched an interview with him, and he's a pretty big Leone fan. And he was like smoking. He was continually lighting a cigar and smoking it during the interview, and it was really annoying because he was like talking with the cigar in his mouth.
Great.
And yeah. But no, Leone ended up directing it himself. Weird that he actually tried to get a different director on this, considering that he considered it his magnum opus and like the greatest thing ever.
I think because it took so long to make, he was starting to realize that maybe he wasn't going to get to make it, and he could just like take a producer role.
Maybe.
because maybe he thought studios weren't picking up the movie because it was him directing a movie that wasn't a Western.
Yeah.
Apparently, when the movie was originally conceived in 1975, Gerard Depardieu was cast as Max, and then Richard Dreyfuss was Noodles. And then that all fell apart when the movie didn't get made in 75 and took another 16 years to get made. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as for the filming, the interiors were done in Italy, as they seem to always be done. But the exteriors, they did go to New York City for this. They also went to Florida. They actually went there.
Yeah, I read that.
They went to Canada. I read that the only thing they did in Canada was the scene where, what's his name, dies. The
Matt?
kid.
What's
Him. The
his
little
name?
boy who
Yeah,
dies.
what was his name?
I don't remember. I think it was that scene. I'll put it in the show notes. I'm pretty sure it was that. Now I'm starting to second guess myself. But there was one thing they did in Canada. I think it was a scene where the mob leader, the guy or whatever, kills the little kid.
Damn, I don't remember his name.
No, I don't either. And they also went to France for some of the scenes. I don't know what they did in France, but they went there.
Wow. Well, speaking of filming scenes, this was another part of the Elizabeth McGovern interview was she was talking about filming the rape scene in the car. And she was like, she got on this top. Well, they asked her about the rape scene, and then she got on. She's like, yeah, it was uncomfortable, but that was the one scene in the movie where I knew what I had to do for the scene. Because she talked about being a young actress, and as she said, when I was playing the old person, I really didn't know what to do. She was saying when I did the rape scene, it was awkward and it wasn't great, but I knew exactly what I needed to do in that scene. And I needed to be disgusted and I needed to scream. And she's like, I knew exactly what to do. Huh. And Leone never really gave me any direction on what else to feel or act in any of the other scenes. I just kind of made it up.
Huh. That's actually going back to Once Upon a Time in the West. That's actually something Fonda said is Leone was starting to get annoyed because Fonda was asking him way too many questions, just minute stuff hey, when I pick up this cup of water, should I do it with my left hand or my right hand? Leone was just just do it.
Pick up a cup of water.
So I guess he's not a very hands-on director, despite all the people out there over time who have said Leone is a director who sees the movie in his head before it's made, but he didn't know which hand Frank was supposed to pick up the water with. So
didn't see the whole movie.
But this was released, and this also has somewhat of a cult following of, again, like you mentioned, people thinking that this is the best movie ever made.
I don't even think that's a cult following. I think there are notable, credible publications that definitely put this on the top 50 to 100 movies ever made. And solidly high up on the list too. In the low 30s to 20s, maybe even the low 10s sometimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't really have much else.
Oh, and then and then we were talking about putting it on the best movies of all time, and I mentioned that there were critics that put it solidly low 40s to 30s, 20s, 10s sometimes even.
Yeah, well, I don't agree. Maybe we should explain where our intro to this episode came from. Is when we were watching Duck You Sucker, there was such a high body count in that movie that we joked
the body count had to have been in the hundreds, no joke.
There's so many on-screen deaths that we were was this movie just an excuse to portray death and violence? Was this entire plot conceived as just an excuse around that? And then when we watched Once Upon a Time in America, we were was this entire movie just an excuse to portray sex and rape?
Yeah, because there's a concerning amount of this movie that is rape scenes. And I when I was talking to my friends, I estimated it at solidly 30 minutes of the movie, at least, being rape scenes. This movie was severely cut down for the American release by a lot. Sergio Leone originally envisioned it as 2 3-hour movies.
Yeah.
The studio was not happening. So he made it as a 4-hour and 30-minute movie instead.
I read that when it first came to Russia, it was actually shown as 2 movies. 2 hour and a half to 2-hour movies.
I'm just thinking because there's an intermission. And I'm remembering thinking it was very late in the movie, 2.5 hours. And I'm just realizing that timing would actually make sense if it was the full 4.5 hour cut. That timing of the intermission would actually make sense.
Yeah. Well, we watched the 4 hour 11 minute one, which is I think the most common and widespread one that you can watch today.
Because the one with the most. No, we watched the 350 one, didn't we? Or the 4. I don't remember.
Well, because
We watched
there's
whichever
so many
one's on Amazon.
Yeah.
We watched whichever one's on Amazon.
Well, the most common ones are like the 350, the 411, and there's another one that's like 430 something.
Well, those are the two most common, and then there's one that's like 424, I think, which is like, I think it's Quentin Tarantino who's like been heavily involved in, or his company's been heavily involved in trying to secure, because they've still got, I think, 11 minutes of footage that they're trying to restore from the original cut of the movie that they just like don't have the rights to or haven't been able to find, and they're like still heavily involved in trying to put that together.
Yeah, and if you watch that one, which is the longest one, there are some scenes that they were unable to restore to the standards of the rest of the movie, so you'll get some scenes that are very grainy and look not as good as the rest of the movie.
Mm-hmm. There's something interesting that I want to mention. In the very final scene of the movie, Noodles sees a garbage truck start up. He sees a guy run out of the mansion, and then the kind of implication that you're supposed to get is that the guy who ran out of the mansion jumps into the garbage truck and commits suicide. Because then the garbage truck drives past Noodles. He sees like stuff getting mulched in the truck. Sergio Leone wanted it to be like ambiguous that, first off, that someone had jumped into the truck to kill themselves, but also he wanted it to be ambiguous whether or not it was Max. So what he did was he used Max, or what's his name? James Woods' stunt double to portray Max in that scene, because he was someone or body double, who looked very much like James Woods from a distance, but wasn't exactly him.
Huh. Interesting.
So just a kind of cool little tidbit there.
Yeah, and when this came out, like we mentioned, there were tons of cuts, many different versions.
Yeah, I think the American release version was like 2.5 hours or something ridiculous.
Yeah, and it put every scene in chronological order, which I actually said if you look up online, like, should I watch the chronological one or should I watch the original one? Like 90% of people are going to be saying, like, don't do yourself a favor and watch the original non-chronological one. But when I watched this, I was like, I didn't think that putting this in chronological order would make it like worse, or maybe it's because I just didn't like the movie very much in general, but I don't know.
Putting in chronological order separates it into 3 very distinct stories, and I guess that's kind of why it might be worse, because instead of being one, because the way it's set up now, we start in the Middle Times, and then we get the future where old Noodles comes back and he explains, like, I'm trying to figure out who's called me here and what job I'm supposed to do and who took the money. Right. That we get introduced to in the current time scene, shall we say. And then from that, we immediately lead into like how the gang formed. And that's like those 3 scenes not only set up the 3 timelines, but do so in a very natural progression in the movie where the plot points weave together.
Right.
And I think that if you put them in chronological order, you would start with the forming of the gang. You would find out that they stored in the locker, and that's where it would end, because it ends pretty much, when the other kid dies. And then you get all the middle scenes, which is the bulk of the movie. And it would end like on the scene of him catching the train, or not catching the train, actually, because he walks out of the train station. And then you'd be really confused, because then it would start with the guy like, who took the money? What's going on? Like, I feel like you would just separate the movie into 3 distinct stories. Yeah, so instead of one conflict that you kind of see butterfly out, you see like little tidbits of it, and then you kind of get the backstory and stuff. You're getting 3 kind of, I guess, distinct conflicts. But now that I think about it, since this was based on what we're assuming, or I guess remembering as an autobiography, right? Mm-hmm. Like what was his name? Oh yeah, this is actually this is relevant. I can't believe I forgot about this. Sorry, I'm going to preempt what you're going to say, because I think it's going to be related. Yeah. Sergio Leone actually met with the guy who wrote the book. Harry Gray. Because the guy was a really big fan of Sergio Leone's work, and he was able to get a drink with him. And every so often he would ask Gray, they were talking, and then every so often he'd ask Gray a story about his life, or a question about his life, and he would give like a very terse response. But that meeting is actually what inspired Leone to tell the story out of chronological order, because that meeting was the guy recollecting his life to Leone out of order, and that's why Leone decided to tell the movie that way, because he wanted it to be like a guy recollecting his life at the end of his life and doing it out of order, because that's just how you recollect events.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I was gonna wonder, like, is the book in that order, or is it just beginning to end, chronological?
I don't know about that, but
Yeah, and I mean, part of me wants to say, because all of Sergio Leone's movies, or actually almost all of them, so the ones that do this are For a Few Dollars More, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West. So basically all of them except a Fistful of Dollars have some weird like time shenanigans where like you get the story, but then you find out a little bit about the character's backstory in the climax or something. You get like a scene from the past in the climax. And this one takes it to a different level.
Yeah. But it like makes sense with the style, I guess, because it's not like something he hasn't done before. Just done this time. It's a bigger time scale.
Yeah. This also in our watch through of all Sergio Leone's movies, because we've watched all of them now except
for one.
One, which he also has another one that he's uncredited as a director for. We started Fistful of Dollars was not his. Well, it was his script, but it wasn't really. And then this one is based on something else. So the two the two bookends are ones that are not original to his movies.
Yeah. And I don't really have much else to say about this movie, actually.
No, yeah, neither do I.
We talk about how it works as a trilogy, and actually, while we've been going through this episode, I actually do think it works. I think it works very well as a trilogy, but only if you consider the main character to not be any of the characters in the movies, but consider the main character to be the country of America.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because they're all movies that have sort of this different take on like what America even is through this like weird Italian lens.
But not only that, it like shows the progression of America through history, because we start in the end of the West, right, with the railroad, the start of interconnectedness among Americans, with the Transcontinental Railroad coming soon, and the railroad just making transportation quicker. Then the second movie, we get the Mexican Revolution and how everybody's like, America's such a great country now. We want to go to America. We want to be like America because there's so much opportunity. And the third one, we get kind of the pinnacle of that, where it's like you've got all this opportunity, and then like Prohibition era, like this is what you do with it. Prohibition sucks, alcohol sucks, America sucks now, but we're making the best of what we can and making a ton of money while we do it.
Well, through all of this, the actual characters in the movie become like both more selfish and less like, I don't want to say like, they become less like righteous, I guess, because you have like characters like Harmonica and Cheyenne. Of course you have Frank, but you have like Harmonica and Cheyenne. And I can't remember her name for the life of me. Jill. In the first one. And they're like, yeah, they're pretty, there's nothing really like questionable about those characters very much. And there's not very much, especially in the context of the Old West. And then you get John and Juan. It's like, okay.
Well,
and then you get freaking Noodles and Max.
Well, the thing about John and Juan is that it's interesting because they're almost like, I think, in terms of how good or bad they are, morally, are kind of on the opposite spectrum, because Juan is like, I just want the money. I want to rob the bank. I want the money. I don't care who we kill to do it. And like, that's all I care about. And John's there because he lived through the Irish Revolution, and he's like, he heard there was another revolution that might need his help to like overthrow a tyrannical government. And so he's there for what is typically perceived to be a more justified reason than Juan. But by the end of the movie, they're kind of, Juan is taught to love. I don't know. John is taught that maybe money isn't so bad, although he doesn't get paid for anything. He explicitly doesn't take any money for any of this. So, but then we get Noodles and Max. And that's the other thing is I know we were talking about this when we watched the movie, but like if you cut down Once Upon America, say if you cut all the rape scenes, you actually get a very different interpretation, in my opinion, of Noodles' character, because Noodles, of all the characters, is the one who has any shred of, let's say, moral, quote, correctness, unquote, whatever that means, because he's the one who's like, if we do this job where we rob this jeweler, we're not going to steal, we're not going to kill anyone. Like, it's got to be a nonviolent job. And when the rest of his gang kills the guy who hires them, he's like, yo, what the heck was that? Like, that's not what I signed up for. And then he drives their car into the lake. And if you cut the scene in the middle where he rapes the store owner's wife while they're robbing the store,
And when he rapes Deborah.
Yeah, but I'm like talking.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
this scene is an example
Okay,
of,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
if
All
you
right.
cut that scene, you come out of that sequence of events thinking, you know, Noodles was the one who was like trying to stop them from being violent or mean, just caring about the money, so to speak. But if you leave that scene in, you get this whole different interpretation. It's like, yeah, he doesn't like killing people, but he has no problems with violence against women, let's say, right?
Yeah, and we should mention that the American cut, the original one, did cut out anything related to like sex and nudity.
And that might be why it's considered like substantially worse, because your perception of Noodles and probably most of the other characters too will be like drastically altered by that edit, especially in the end of the movie where Noodles doesn't kill Max because he's like, killing you is not going to get my revenge. Like, I've put this life behind me and I just don't care anymore. And in a cut where you cut the rape scenes out, that's a scene that's like very much in line with his character, because he's always been nonviolent the whole movie, whereas you leave him in and now he's like, you have to wonder if it's a genuine character defining moment for him or if it's just his way of getting revenge on Max by making Max live through this hell on Earth.
Yeah.
But anyway, I do think the movies actually work pretty well as a trilogy to show the like development of America and through this, like you said, very Italian lens, but they do all focus on aspects of American culture at the time that they're representing, and I think it is actually very interesting.
Yeah, I think they work pretty well as a trilogy.
Surprising, because when we went into it and like there were no interweaving characters, we're like, this is gonna suck.
Well, that's almost a lot of the I don't want to say a lot of the movies we've watched that don't have those connections between the characters work better, because I don't know if that's necessarily true, but it's almost easier to do like these sort of thematic connections that we're kind of talking about, because like by the time you get to, I don't know, like Toy Story 3, for example, it's like, all right, what are the toys going to do now? Like, what's their next adventure type thing? Although Toy Story 3 I don't think is a good example of that, but I mean, I think you kind of know what I mean.
Yeah, you get kind of tired of the characters.
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess it's the difference between like your trilogy being focused on these characters and their character arcs rather than being focused on like themes, which I think this trilogy very much is focused on, like these themes of American opportunity and industrialism, and that's the through line of the trilogy and not necessarily the characters in the movies.
Yeah, that's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because the technology is something that I wanted to mention, forgot. So in the first one, we're getting like the start of, you know, the railroads and stuff. In the second movie, when we watched it, we're like, what the hell is this? Like, is this an alternate universe? Because we saw them we saw John riding the motorcycle, and we're like, what? Like, when does this take place? So like, we get that progression, and then obviously, Once Upon a Time in America is this industrialized place already, fully, you know, New York City, whatever, up until the 60s, of course. So, yeah, interesting there.
It's very interesting.
That's all I pretty much had.
Yeah, that's actually all pretty much I had. Maybe we should briefly explain that once this episode goes out, we're going to be returning with Inevitable next.
Yeah. So if you don't know what that is, we do another podcast that we kind of switch off with this one. It's called Inevitable Classic Sci-Fi Podcast, where we watch classic sci-fi shows.
Yeah, so this we'll just finish season 2 of that when this season airs, and then we'll be going into season 3 of that. But then after that, when season 3 and 4 potentially of Inevitable are out, we'll be returning with season 3 of Triple Play, and the first movie we'll be watching for that is The Godfather.
The Godfather, yeah. So we actually have the full lineup. Should we go through what we're doing? I mean, why not?
Yeah,
right?
let's do that.
Yeah. So we're gonna for season 3.
Not necessarily in this order, except for the fact that Godfather is first.
Yeah. So we'll be doing The Godfather, Cars, Taken, Triple X, Coetzee, and RoboCop as our 6 trilogies for the next
I noticed
season.
that between both these seasons we have. What did we watch this season? Do you have the list of what we watched this season?
Yeah. Lord of the Rings, Once Upon a Time, Men in Black, Despicable Me, Fred, Rocky.
Yeah, I was going to say so between these 2 seasons already, I've noticed that we've created potentially unintentionally, I think it is unintentional, kind of almost a quota of 2 lengthy, heavy movies. So we got Lord of the Rings and Once Upon a Time, and then we have Godfather and
What, RoboCop?
no.
Coetzee?
Coetzee. Kotze
I don't think those are
trilogy.
going to be. I don't think they're lengthy. I think they'll just be hard to get through.
Yeah, I mean, I guess thematically heavy, I should say, maybe. And then we have the like lighthearted action thriller that's Men in Black / RoboCop. We got the animated movie that was intentional to put an animated trilogy in.
I didn't remember actually that was intentional, but all right.
That was intentional. That I remember that was intentional.
And then we have the one to just round it out, which I guess is Fred. Well, we wanted to do some worse movies.
Yeah, that's where
we
we
want to
get
mix
Fred
in
and
the
Fred
bad
and
ones.
Triple X.
Yeah,
The bad ones are Fred and Triple X.
I don't know what Triple X is actually.
I do, and
All right. Well, that's what we're doing for the next season.
yeah, so you can look forward to that probably at the later tail of this year, but who knows? Well, I say who knows because we haven't actually decided if we're doing season 3 and 4 of Inevitable back to back. I mean, we'll have decided when this episode goes out, and I guess I could always go back and like re-record we could go back and re-record it, but
take the time to do that.
So who knows? Anyway, if you'd like to reach out to us and email us about any of the trilogies we've covered this season, or maybe any preemptive thoughts about the trilogies for next season, you can reach us at thedoctor@decorativevegetable.com. Questions, comments, concerns, angry rants, love letters, thoughts on trilogies, suggestions for trilogies, because we are looking for more trilogies that we want to add to the list to do in the future. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify, all at Triple Play. You can find us on YouTube at Decorative Vegetable. Be sure to leave a rating if you like the show.
Check us out on Facebook, Trust Your Doctor. Like us on Facebook. Also check us out on Twitter at TYD Podcast, and follow us on Twitter. And like we mentioned, next time we'll be starting off Season 3 with The Godfather. But until then, the end.